Oh my gosh, Rob, do you see that? We've waited our entire lives for this.
He's so beautiful. How many people can actually say they've seen a Bigfoot in person?
I know. Look at how the full moon just glistens off of his majestic fur.
He kind of stinks. Like 50 wet dogs.
Wait. He's arching his back. I think he's about to howl. We are the Brohio Podcast, and we are on a never-ending quest to explore all of the unknown.
True crime, paranormal, demons, hauntings, aliens, UFOs, urban legends, and all of the occult. We are your one-stop shop anytime you want to take a walk on the dark side.
You can find the Brohio Podcast anywhere you download your favorite podcast. We have new episodes every week. Thank you so much for listening.
You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all at Brohio Podcast.
Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And we're the hosts of Corpus Delicti.
If true crime is your thing, it's ours too. And we do it with a dash of lightheartedness and a hint of Southern charm.
We cover both well and lesser known cases, and have also started a series where we spend weeks at a time covering cases from certain topics.
Ever wondered why there are so many cruise ship deaths and disappearances? How about how crime has affected history? What about lesser known serial killers? Corpus Delicti has you covered.
Episodes are released every Tuesday and can be found on your favorite podcatcher.
That's CorpusDelicti. Hope you'll join us soon.
Hey, I'm Shar.
And I'm Kelly, and together we host Drinking and Screaming.
We're a new horror discussion podcast based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, where each episode we pair a new cocktail with our movie of the week.
For instance, I'm pairing this ad with just a shot of tequila. You know, because most ads are horrible.
With Drinking and Screaming, you'll find yourself pulled into a new horror film to discuss and a new cocktail to try every week.
Every episode is laced with great soundtracks, theme breakdowns, production trivia, Char's bad drinks, and so much more.
What?
I said clips from the movie.
New episodes every week. Join in on the spoops. Drinking and Screaming, wherever podcasts are found.
I give this ad a 5 out of 10.
You know, we don't rate the movies.
5 out of 10.
I don't think anyone has the right to take the life when I'm under Hello, and welcome to The Sinful Show. I am your host, Father Sin. If you know me personally, I go by Ray as well. Those were some great trailers to some awesome podcasts I love. Starting off there was Brohio, Nick and Rob. I love you too. You guys are the greatest. Love you so much. Following up with that, we had Corpus Delicti, 2 wonderful Southern belles. Very great show. Last but not least, oh yeah, just discovered them this past week. Drinking and Screaming. Pretty cool show. Digging it. You guys gotta go check them all out. Awesome shows. So, do you believe in psychics? Do you believe in faith healers? As a skeptic, as many of you know by now, that I am, but I'm open-minded. I am open-minded and always willing to see the proof if someone's willing to show it to me. Faith healing, not so much. But I had the chance this week to talk to the world's greatest mentalist, Banachek. It was kind of like a dream come true for me. I was a little bit starstruck. I had 8 million other questions I wanted to ask him, but I got hung up because I was so overjoyed just to speak to the man. I've talked to quite a few people this past week, and they're like, who's Banachek? I'm like, well, you definitely got to check out Banachek. He's one of the most interesting people I've ever got to talk to. For one, like I said, world's greatest mentalist. Which, you check out some of the videos and stuff I do when I go downtown or out and about shooting promos. I like doing mentalist type tricks and stuff like that. Just because it's pretty awesome and I love to see the reaction on people. But what's so special about Banachek was he infiltrated like a parapsychology study they were doing. And not only he had these people convinced he was psychic or telekinetic or whatnot, this wasn't just like a day or two or a week or a month. This went on for 3 years, and this was called the Alpha Project. Check it out. Look up Banachek and the Alpha Project. It's pretty cool. Again, thank you, Banachek, for coming on to the Sinful Show. And also his manager, Tyus, for arranging everything for me. It was like a dream come true for me. So let's jump into this interview with Banachek. Hello.
Hi, how you doing, Raymond?
I'm doing good. And for the ones that are just tuning in here, I am here with a very special guest, and I'm kind of in awe right now.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I am. I mean, it's a great honor to have you here. I am here with Banachek. And for the ones that don't know who Banachek is, Banachek, why don't you fill in my listeners of who you are?
Well, I'm pretty eclectic. I am many things, really. Primarily started out as a skeptic, working as a psychic, convincing scientists that I was a psychic, only to come out and explain it was all an illusion. We can get more into those details later on. But really, primarily, I am a mentalist. I also run the James Randi Educational Foundation's $1 Million Challenge, where we challenge psychics to demonstrate their abilities under proper scientific control. And if they can, they would have got $1 million. We can talk more about that later because that has now changed slightly. So I'm the president of the James Randi Educational Foundation. But primarily, I am known as a mentalist. And what that means is I take my 5 known senses to create the illusion of a sixth sense, and for entertainment purposes only, I appear to read minds. I'm a mentalist. A lot of people now tend to know what a mentalist means from America's Got Talent.
Right. So, there's a big difference between a mentalist and a magician, correct?
Mentalism is a subcategory of magic, but the thinking, the philosophy, and the performance aspect of it, yes, a very big difference.
Okay. And how long have you been doing mentalism now?
I've been doing mentalism since I was 16 years old, and I was born in 1960, so that would be around 1976.
Well, that's before I was born.
Yep, before many people were born, actually, unfortunately. I feel like I'm 18, but not.
Hey, that's the main thing today. You know, the 60's the new 20 nowadays, from what I'm hearing.
That's exactly right, yes. I can keep up with the young ones.
Yeah. So, now, you said something about $1 million challenge?
Yep. So back in 1964, I was 4 years old at that time, talking about being young. The amazing Randy, James Randi, who was an escape artist, magician, on a radio show, he offered $1,000 to any psychic who could perform a a psychic happening under proper scientific controls. He would test them, and if they could demonstrate their abilities, he would give them $1,000. Now, he's not the first one to do that. Houdini did it. Banachek did it before him. Banachek was a well-known mentalist back in the 60s and the 50s. But Randy did that, and then later on he moved it up to $10,000, and then it became $100,000, and then I think it was 1969. There was a gentleman who sponsored it for $1 million. It had been $1 million before that because Randy got a lot of people sign up and say that they would give $1,000, $10,000, whatever it may be, until it made $1 million. But a lot of psychics said, how are you going to get that money from them if I demonstrate my abilities? And that did become a question and a problem. So a multi-millionaire, probably a billionaire, stepped up and said, look, I'll put the money in escrow, so the money is actually there. So if any psychic can demonstrate their abilities, the money is there. So that argument is now a moot point.
Right. So, I mean, with $1 million up, I mean, there had to been a ton of people coming out of the woodwork for that.
There were a ton of people. It became an issue because, you have to separate people that are mentally ill from the actual people who believe that they have these abilities. Well, even mentally ill people might believe they have those abilities, from people who you could actually test. And the hardest part also became we had to set up the test with those people, and most people don't understand what science is. They don't understand why you have to put these controls on their abilities to demonstrate them so that we can find out if it's genuine or not. And this became an ongoing thing. So the amount of paperwork, the amount of man hours that went into even just working with one particular claimant was just, it became just hundreds and hundreds of man hours. So it became almost impossible to do. And people would often say that it was unfair. And it really wasn't unfair. They just simply didn't understand what science was.
I understand what science is. Personally, because I'm a skeptic myself, and I look at it.
It's not even necessarily being a skeptic when it comes to saying what the science is. Science is really science, and it should work for skeptics or non-skeptics, right? And we would always try to do it like 1 in a million chances if that's possible. It wasn't always like if somebody's bending metal, then you can't. There's no stats for that, right? They just have to demonstrate their ability. But in a lot of things, whether guessing ESP cards or trying to find a picture of a dead person amongst others, you can put the stats up to 1 in a million. And we had there were two sections to this. There was the preliminary tests, which would be maybe 1 in 1,000, and if they passed that, they would then go on to the formal test, which putting both tests together would be 1 in a million. The reason we had both was if we found any loopholes or something that we hadn't thought about under the testing procedure that could, enable them to cheat, we would be able to take that out in the formal testing. And that protected them from people saying that they cheated, and it also protected us from people actually cheating. But they just, most of them just didn't understand, why we were doing that once we got into it. They would agree to tests, and then they would fail, and they would say, well, this is not normally the conditions that I do it under.
I mean, what other conditions would they normally do it? They have to have, like, pop rocks and pixie sticks and stuff like that, or
well, it would really depend upon what it was they were claiming, right? There were so many different claims. I'll give you an example. We did a TV show, and we did Nightline, and you can look this up online. You can go online and take a look it up. You can put Amazing Challenge, $1 million challenge and Nightline, and it would come up, or James Randi and $1 million challenge Nightline, it should come up. And so we had set tests because we were not going to be able to sit for a month or two, which is what it normally would take with any of the psychics. And one of the tests was a mediumistic test, and it's what we would call more of a living and dead test in the mentalism realm. Basically, you have a picture of a dead person and you have pictures of living people, and these are put in identical envelopes. They're sealed and they're mixed and they're laid out in a row. And we would ask every single psychic ahead of time, is this within your realm of ability? And they all said yes, or at least most of them said yes. And we would say, how well would you do? And we didn't want them saying they're only going to do 50%. They had to do better than that. But we also didn't want somebody to say, it wasn't a game show. Let's put it that way. It wasn't them just trying to get $1 million. They had to say that they were going to be doing it for real and that they could actually, their stats would be really good. And every single one of them agreed. And so basically what they were saying to us is that this is in their realm of abilities. But once they got tested and they failed, they would say, well, that's not in my realm of abilities. It's not what I normally do. One of the readers, the palm readers, one of the things that we did for her was we took a list of every person's, we would have 12 people, and those people would list what they do for a living, their hobbies, their likes, and a bunch of questions that the psychic said that we should ask them. And they would put those on a paper. And then the psychic would be given a Xerox of their hands. And from the readings of the hands, she should have been able to match up the palms with those people's, what they did for a living and their hobbies and so forth. But in the end, she said to us, well, this is not what I normally do. I normally have to get feedback from the people. And that's the problem, right? They're getting feedback from their people. And that's why their readings were working before, because they were actually getting this feedback. And they just didn't realize it. That shows you that there's nothing psychic going on.
Yeah, like that feedback stuff, that's kind of like in, like an example, like John Edwards, Sylvia Brown, like how they kind of like, they're reaching for it, like I'm trying to look.
It's a part of what the scum's doing, and I call them scum because they're basically, they're putting a halt on a person's grieving process for their own game. And the grieving process is part of life. You need to go through the grieving process in order to continue with the living, because otherwise you're just continuing with the dead, and that's what they do. But that's part of the process they use when it comes to cold reading. But most of those psychics, the famous psychics that we see out there, the majority of them are using on some level heart readings. And what that means is that in this day and age, you can get background information on people ahead of time, especially if you know that they're going to be coming to your show. It's real easy to look people up on social media.
Yeah, there's I think there's an actual group out there. They were going out to some of those shows, and they're actually setting up the hot readings themselves, setting up Facebook profiles and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they set the Facebook profiles up years ago, and it wasn't set up there. It was really sort of done as a double-blind thing. So their social media was set up, but they were not allowed to necessarily look, if I remember this correctly, look at the social media themselves. But these things were set up for them, and then they would go to these gatherings of these famous psychics, and the psychics would hone in on them and would start giving them readings. But a lot of the information was fake, and it was mixed with real stuff about them as well. And they were feeding back this stuff, and sometimes a person would say no, but it turns out that was the information that was on their social media as well. But it was very, very well done and set up, and I think it was set up by Susan Gerber, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's one of the people that was doing it.
Yeah, that name rings a bell. I think it's
Gerbeck or Gerber, yeah.
Yeah, her and another gentleman started that, and I actually think because this is what ended up bringing you back into my sight picture was another podcast I listened to, Pretend Radio. There's your plug, Javier. Before the episode even came out, he was promoting your the Alpha Project, which I didn't know that's what it was called. And he talked about two teenagers fooling these scientists, and I go, Javier, when's this coming out? And he goes, oh, that's next season, and he wouldn't give me any information on it. Then finally it came out, and I said, oh my God, that's Banachek.
Yeah, we did a whole, I was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and we talked about that. And then I've done a two-parter with my partner in crime, I like to say, Mike Edwards, on my podcast, Banachek's Brain. And basically what it comes down to is this. Back in the 1970s, 1980s, scientists lamented there was no evidence of ESP under proper scientific control because of lack of funding. Well, it was my contention and Mike Edwards' contention that lack of funding had nothing to do with it. It had to do with the fact that the scientists were going in with a pro-bias. In other words, they were already believing in psychic phenomena. So what they were doing is they were documenting their own belief system rather than using proper science to find out, first of all, if this phenomena was real. So they already believed in it. They just wanted to prove to the rest of the world that it was real. And not only that, we had another hypothesis too, and it was that that these scientists, because they had PhDs, they would not seek the expert advice of somebody outside that didn't have a PhD, like a magician, somebody that could detect the trickery, because they thought they were too smart to be fooled. So for 4 years, Mike and I went in, we bent objects, we moved objects, we proved to them that we had supposedly other abilities outside the boundaries of known science. And then after 4 years, we came out and explained that everything we had done was an illusion. It was a trick. It was a hoax. And a lot of scientists, well, not a lot, but a few people, they started saying, well, it's unethical to fool scientists in the name of science. And my comeback on that was, well, is it ethical for scientists to take money in the name of science and not use proper science? And we would not have got away with what we had accomplished had they have used proper science. I mean, we had very strict rules when we went into this. We had rules like if they ever asked us if we were a magician, we had to say yes, and we were working with the amazing Randy. If they ever asked us if we were working with the amazing Randy, we had to say yes, and we had to come clean at that moment. They never did background checks on us to find out if we were magicians. Had they done that, they would have found out that we were magicians. Well, they would have found out Mike was. Prior to that, I had pretending to be a psychic because Randy had given me that advice to go ahead and keep pretending to be a psychic. Because when I started out, I didn't even know that there were magicians, that I didn't know there was a category of magic called mentalism. All I knew is that there were people conning people using tricks. And so I started putting my own methods together. And when I got so good at it in high school to the point to where students were taking silverware from the cafeteria, they're stealing it and giving it to me to bend, and I got in trouble to that, and they went to plastic silverware until I graduated. I figured a way to make the school bell go off early so that we could get out of school early, and I told the kids I was doing it psychically. Meanwhile, I was just shorting out a couple of wires in the hallway. But I started getting a little cocky because prior to this, I'd been this very, very shy kid because of my background. But I sort of, my world opened, the world became my oyster. So I wrote Randy a letter. I said, look, if you ever need kids to try to fool scientists, I would be happy to go in and do this, only if I can come out in the end and say that it was all a hoax. And I went to go visit Randy. Randy didn't ask me to show him anything. He just wanted to see my character. And he also wanted, if the opportunity ever came about, he wanted to be able to tell the scientists, look, I never taught this kid. He taught himself. Can you imagine if I had taught him what he would have got away with? And I think back about that now, and I think we probably wouldn't have got away with much because we would have been using magicians' methods that were already out there and probably would have been caught. But because I was thinking on my feet, because I was inventing my own methods to get away with these things, I think that's why it lasted a little bit longer than probably it would have. And all during the entire time we worked with the scientists, we were consistently letting Randy know how we were accomplishing everything. And he would immediately write them in a letter and said, like, for instance, if we were moving a rotor under a bell jar, he would immediately write them a letter and say, look, if you're ever going to do an experiment, which was exactly the experiment we just did, if you're ever trying to do an experiment with a rotor under a bell jar, make sure you prevent this from happening and that from happening. So he would basically give them the methods we were using to try to help them. In the very beginning when we were in the laboratory, Randy gave them 11 caveats saying, don't let them do this, don't let them do that. Things like, don't let the subjects work together at the same time because they could distract you. Don't let them work with more than one object at a time because they can use those objects to bend, the other objects or distract you. And he gave them a whole list of these caveats. And the first time we went into the laboratory, they showed us Randy's caveats and they had a good laugh about them, saying, if we were to use any of these, it would make you guys uncomfortable. This is ridiculous. So basically, they let us get away with everything that we wanted to get away with.
And these were like the lead guy. He was a physicist, wasn't he?
He was a physicist, but that doesn't make him the lead guy in parapsychology, right? That just makes him a lead guy in other areas of science. He was working on ether at the time, and that's the belief that there are like particles that pass through everything. I don't know all the details on that. So a very, very smart man, but definitely not, really trained in parapsychology and the ways of trickery.
Yeah, but parapsychology, isn't that considered like a pseudoscience?
It is considered a pseudoscience now, but let's go back to by some people, by most people now, but let's go back to the culture that we had at the time right then, right? You had the Soviet Union that was consistently putting out propaganda about their psychics. You even had, it was being taken so seriously that the United States government sponsored a $22 million, and that was just up front, $22 million project called Project Stargate to find out whether parapsychology had any military applications, and that's where we got remote viewing. You remember the movie Men That Stare at Goats?
Yeah.
That's pretty much a fairly accurate picture of what was going on at that time. So it was, you had In Search Of, which was the #1 TV show. You had people believing in UFOs. So the culture was at that time that psychic phenomena is real. I mean, the books Chariot of Gods came out, which talked about aliens coming down, and it just, you had Carlos Castaneda and his travels. So it was really, the culture was very rich for belief in this type of phenomena at that time. And that is when Uri Geller came out and convinced the world that he was truly a psychic, and he was studied at Stanford Research Institute, and he was using that as sort of an endorsement that he was a real psychic and had been endorsed by scientists. And he was endorsed by Tog and Puthoff, even though the experiments were very faulty, we found out later.
You said
and biased.
What was that guy's name? Uri Geller?
Uri Geller, you can look him up, the best known psychic ever.
But his methods that they tried to find out that stuff was...
There are a lot of people that still believe in Uri today. Uri recently just moved to Israel, but became very, very popular over in Europe in the last 20, 30 years, I would say, as well, after he moved to London.
Okay.
And he's always in the papers, even now. He tends to get publicity. He's very good at generating media attention.
Wow. I'm gonna have to dig into that. That's
yes, definitely do so. Yeah, definitely do so, because Uri, he, after the metal bending, because all the metal bending you see, it all started with Uri, really. All that started with Uri, but then he started to find oil, supposedly, for oil companies. There was a book that came out that said he was abducted by aliens. He's kind of like said that didn't really happen since then, and the guy that wrote the book about him kind of used a sort of poetic license to put that in there. But he still claims he's a genuine psychic to this day.
He claimed that he was born to aliens?
No. He was abducted by aliens.
Abducted by aliens. I'm sorry. Yeah, you cut out
he didn't endorse that belief. He alluded to that, but he never really endorsed it. And he has since said that was something that somebody wrote about him. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I hear about, like, the mainstream ones that I mentioned earlier, but the other thing I look at is, like, some of these religious figures, the faith healers and stuff like that as well. And
sure. Well, we did, back in, I think it was, 1987, if I'm not mistaken. I may have my years wrong now. But that was after Project Alpha, which was where I convinced the scientists I was a genuine psychic. Randy came to Houston, Texas, where I was living at the time, and he was writing an article for, I think it was like Hustler Magazine or Penthouse or one of those, and it was on evangelists. And there was an evangelist coming to town in Houston that he was studying, and he asked me if I wanted to tag along, and of course I said yes. So I showed up at this auditorium with about 10,000 other people. And I'm sitting and I'm watching, and the evangelist finally comes out on stage after much hoopla with other people. And the evangelist in question was none other than Peter Popoff. Now, if you turn on late night TV now, you'll still see Peter Popoff on television. But he comes out on stage, and then he starts saying that he's getting the word of God. And what that means is that God is talking to him directly. So God starts giving him names of people and how they're afflicted. Like, Mrs. Johnson, you're way up there in the back. I believe that you have a tumor on your right breast. And he says, God's going to heal you, and I'm going to heal you. So he starts healing people of cancer. He starts causing people that can't see to see again. He causes people who can't walk to walk again. And it's extremely emotional, because I'm seeing it doing with kids. I'm seeing it do with old people, even to the point where I knew this was all a scam, but I'm getting tears in my eyes with this. Well, Popoff asks for volunteers to come down and get buckets to go around the room to collect offerings. I managed to get down there, and I get the last bucket. I think it was like the 15th bucket, and I'm walking around the auditorium. I'm collecting cash. Now, I have about $10,000 or more in my bucket. And in order to get back to Popoff, I have to walk out of the auditorium back in. I'm thinking I could walk away with this if I was unethical. But I walk up, I hand that to him. He gives me a second bucket to go around and get sealed offerings. And these are checks, so the bucket's full of those. Those come back to him. Then finally he has me go out a third time, and I'm collecting, just offerings that people want to give. And that's like watches, earrings, jewelry, things like that. And that goes to him. The idea is whatever you give, you'll get back tenfold by God some other way. Sorry. you get, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, but you, supposedly you get it back tenfold. And so as I walk back and I hand this last bucket to him, I look up and I notice that he has no ear hole. And what that means is there was a piece of plastic in there. So I walked back up to Randy. I said, look, either this man or God can't heal himself and he's using a hearing aid, or something else is going on. And Randy, I went back and forth on this for a bit, because at first Randy thought he was using mnemonics. Now, mnemonics is a memory system in order to memorize information, because he was giving out a lot of information about a lot of people. And I said to Randy, I know something about mnemonics. I use it in my show. Either you memorize a lot of information about a few things, or a little information about a lot of things, or a little information about just a few things. He's getting so much information about so many things, something else is going on. So at the very next revival, which I think it was in Riverside, California, I could be wrong on that, but Randy got a friend of his from MIT there. Now, our friend had a little scanner box. So hours ahead of time, he scanned every frequency in the area that Popoff was going to be. And lo and behold, when Popoff hits the stage, a brand new frequency pops up. It appears that God transmits on 39.17 megahertz and sound a lot like Peter Popoff's wife. What they were doing is, we took this to the Tonight Show later on and showed it on the Johnny Carson Show. And what we did was we showed, now they would tape every single revival that they had for their TV show that week, because Popoff had a weekly TV show as well. And so they were editing it as the show was going on. They were editing it live. So we were able to take his tape and show it on there without the voiceover on Johnny Carson's show. And then we were able to show the recording that we had. And it starts out with, you hear Mrs. Popoff's voice saying, Petey, if you can't hear me, we're going to be in trouble tonight. Nod your head if you can hear me. And you see Peter Popoff nod his head as he's speaking to the congregation. And then you hear her saying things like, Mrs. Jones is sitting up there on the left side in section 2. And you hear Popoff say, over in section 2, over here somewhere, there's a lady by the name of Mrs. Jones. And that's how she was giving him the information. The ways they got the information were two ways. One, they had prayer cards. So people would fill out these prayer cards ahead of time. They would put their name, how they're afflicted, who their doctor, and what they wished would happen. And these were put inside of a box. And unbeknownst to those, these would be switched out. Another way was Mrs. Popoff would come out, and people come to these revivals hours ahead of time hoping to be healed, right? So Mrs. Popoff would come out and she'd say, hi, my name's Mrs. Popoff. Peter's my husband. Hopefully he'll get to you. What's wrong with you? Oh, really? And what's your doctor say? And then she would go out and she had a tape recording of this and she would transcribe all that information. Now, she would be out in the truck and she would just go through all these transcripts and she would feed that to him. Another little trick that he used was what we call the Catherine Kuhlman wheelchair trick. Now, Catherine Kuhlman was an evangelist, one of the early ones. And one of the things that they do is they have one of their people come out. Catherine Kuhlman or Peter Popoff would have one of his crew come out, and they wait for people that's walking in with a cane. So there's somebody will walk in with a cane. They're not walking very well, and they walk up and say, look, I can put you in a wheelchair, and I can actually put you right up front. Well, who's not going to want to be right up front by this man of God who's going to heal people, right? More chance you're going to get attention. And as they're walking them down, they go, oh, what's your name? Where you from? Really? What's your doctor say about your affliction? Good. Well, hopefully he'll get to you tonight. And they put him down up front. Now, when the good reverend comes out, he can point at that person and say, I've never met you before, because he hasn't. And he says, God says you can't walk, and he tells me he's going to heal you tonight. Now, the person's not going to contradict him and say, yeah, I can walk. They're going to pretty much think this is a man of God. What he must mean is I can never walk properly again. So the person nods their head yes, in agreement. Everybody thinks this person can't walk. The reverend walks over, breaks a cane, throws it up on stage. Nobody questions why a person who can't walk has a cane, right? They don't even question that. And on top of that, that cane's probably worth a lot of money because, hey, if you use a cane for everyday life, you're going to make sure you get an expensive, good cane. But the reverend doesn't care about that. It's not his cane. He says, I say you can walk. God says you can walk. Stand up. So the person stands up. You get the first miracle of somebody who couldn't walk is now standing. He says, take a few steps, and the person kind of hobbles. Now, keep in mind, this person has all this attention on them. So they have all this adrenaline flowing through their body. So they're really, truly feeling better with the dopamine and adrenaline that's rushing through their body. So they feel like they might be being healed on some level. But to the rest of the audience, a person who couldn't walk is now walking. That's a true miracle. Now, Peter Popoff sits in the wheelchair. He says, go to the back of the wheelchair. The person goes to the back of the wheelchair, says, push me. That's really easy because basically the wheelchair now becomes a walker. And then the real piece de resistance is he takes the wheelchair, puts it back where it goes, and says to him, now that's your wheelchair, meaning the chair that you're sitting at home right there now in, or in your office or wherever it is. If I was to point to that chair, and let's say you're not at your own studio, right? You're at somebody else's house, but you're sitting in a chair, and I say, is that your chair? You're going to say yes because it's a chair you're sitting in for right now. Maybe you got out of it for a few seconds. So they say yes, meaning that's where they're sitting. Not meaning it's their wheelchair, but to everybody else, it means that they brought that wheelchair with them. So a miracle has happened. He's made a person who can't walk again. And they had a ton of these tricks. We exposed Popoff, and it took about 2 years or so for him to go off the air. But now he's back on the air. He's back at it again. He's bigger than ever. But he does things like somebody out there has cancer. Somebody out there has a headache. Somebody out there has a migraine. Somebody out there can't walk. God's going to heal you. I'm going to heal you. And he does it through the television. Well, you can't really question that, can you?
No, not really.
No.
That's
how
what's
these
scary
guys work.
because... I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying that's kind of scary because that's kind of like what Jim Jones did.
Yeah, Jim Jones did the same thing, but Jim Jones was using trickery. Jim Jones was really evil, and Jim Jones, he was. People should go look this up if they don't know about Jim Jones. It's one of the biggest cult killings ever. Mass suicides, but he forced them into doing it, into drinking poison Kool-Aid. But he was using psychic surgery to convince his congregation that he was a genuine psychic, and that's where you take your hand and you dig it into a person's body and you pull out blood and guts, and it's nothing but sleight of hand trickery. I've done it a million times myself. In fact, I used to perform that at comedy clubs. Not very funny, but it was always to give that big punch at the end, and people would laugh at the sight of the blood and everything else. But I was also able to end with a very meaningful story.
Yeah, I did two episodes of them a while back ago, and it was like I was finding other research that like other people never heard about, and it was very, very interesting. And it's like that's scary because people always ask how do situations like this unfold and how does it happen?
Well,
and he started off.
Unfolds very easy. Yeah, unfolds easy. I mean, you took a look, Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman, a very smart man, one of our greatest comedians. When he got cancer, he actually went to a psychic surgeon in the Philippines. When you get to that point of desperation, when you know that it's fatal, when you know that it's terminal, that you're going to die, you'll try anything. It's kind of like, why not try it at that point? That's kind of where we get to, unfortunately, right? However, there have been situations of families that are very superstitious, that have saved their entire money. A village has given them entire money to send the child to a psychic surgeon because they believe this is real. And for less money than going to the psychic surgeon, they could have been healed of something that would have been easily, taken care of by a real medical expert, a proper doctor.
It's scary, man. Very, very scary stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Especially when it gets into that type of stuff, right? Because people, it's life or death. It gets to that point. And that's the problem with superstition. A lot of people say, well, what's wrong with people reading tarot cards or reading palms and stuff like that? It leads you into this sort of belief. It believes you starting to believe in the woo-woo, which opens you up into these other areas. And then you start getting to people that are ignorant, people that really don't understand anything about these. Like I just gave you the example of an entire village that believes in superstition. They save their money because they believe that this woo-woo, this witch doctor can actually heal them by doing psychic surgery. And the child ends up dying as a result. And you see this all the time, even now with vaccines, people believing in a fake study that was out, that was endorsed. And we have so much research now showing out that vaccines do not cause those problems and do not cause autism. And yet parents are afraid because it's their child. And so, as a result, they get measles, smallpox is on the rise, and they're not getting the vaccines that they should be getting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm lucky. I've got 2 little girls myself, and I'm lucky. My wife's a nurse practitioner, and we discussed this, and I was like, hey, I've heard this, and this, and she was able to sit me down and be like, that's just bullshit, right?
Right.
And I'm like, so.
Well, you have this
But
problem.
she's
It's
just like-
ongoing, with Christian scientists and that who won't take their child in for simple treatments, for simple, cures for simple diseases, or a common cold, or the flu or something like that, and so the child dies as a result. And in a way, it's sort of child abuse, and it's really sad because they lose their child and they're going through the grief as well. And yet, it's all because of this belief that they have, which is based upon pseudoscience.
Right. Also, well, didn't like a whole boat of Scientologists get like docked somewhere because of a measles outbreak because they don't believe in vaccinations?
I don't know. I would have to do research to find out if that's true. I certainly don't know anything about that.
I think I heard something about that. It was like a whole group of Scientologists, and they're on this big boat, and they ended up getting docked somewhere because of a measles outbreak.
I'd have to do research on that because the story almost sounds too good to be true, and you know how that is when it's too good to be true. It's I don't like to jump on the bandwagon with those things or spread those kind of rumors. So I would suggest that anybody that hears this right now should take a look online and find out for themselves if that's true before they pass it on. So I hate it when the other side does that. I hate it when believers, just jump on anything. I hate it when they do it in politics. So I certainly couldn't endorse that, but it does sound like a really funny story. Sadly, a funny story in a sad sort of way. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. I'll have to find the article again, and I'll forward it to Tyus or you or whatever, and you can look into it as well. So I just thought it was interesting because I heard about it and I read about it. And it was a while ago, but I
certainly
thought it was
plausible,
pretty interesting. So.
Certainly is plausible. I don't know who would stop them though, unless they're coming into some country somewhere. It's funny because I was just recently over in Asia. They have heat cameras now, that basically thermal cameras, and as you're walking, it's reading people's body temperatures to find out whether they have a fever or sickness or something like that, and they won't let you into the country if your temperature is if you have a fever.
Really?
Yeah, it's amazing what they're doing with tech now. So it's not so much of asking if you have a fever, because who's going to say that they have a fever when they're coming into our country? They're actually actively looking for it.
Yeah, but, something like that here in America, people they go into a tailspin about that, and it's invading their privacy and their rights and stuff like that.
Yeah, the whole PC thing has gotten way out of hand. So, it's this thing of being protected as opposed to, your rights. It's really interesting the way the world's turned upside down right now, right?
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I mean, I was originally a police officer for almost 20 years, and I could see the difference from the start of my career up into the end of it, and even reflecting to the middle of it, and you could see changes all through that, and everything's changing with the PC culture. I'm doing a little quotey fingers. You can't see me.
Yeah, it's a pendulum right now. It's one of the high points. It'll come back towards the middle at some point. We can only hope.
And as you being an entertainer, I'm sure you've had to make some changes with that, with some of your acts and stuff like that, haven't you?
I do. It's interesting. I try not to because it's an act and I know it's performance, but you look, even comedians are having a hard time with it now, right? And I think a comedian should be able to say anything they want to because it's a lot of it's satirical, but it's their opinion. But it's just they're having a very hard time with the things that they say, and it's funny how certain people can say certain things and other people can't. And I don't think that's fair either. But yeah, in my show, I have certain moments, and there are reasons I do certain things, and there are certain moments when I go, wow, could this be taken as sort of sexist? Could this be taken in the wrong way by one individual? And that's all it takes is one individual to stand up and complain about it, and it becomes this huge thing. I have a poster, and in this poster, there's newsprint that's coming out, and it's hugging me, and it's two women that are hugging me. And basically, they're holding my arms and they're holding me back. And in the newsprint, it's got all kinds of different words about psychic phenomena and everything else. And I will call them an idiot, some idiot online started saying, hey, this is sexist, and it's, he's groping the girls and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not groping the girls. I'm pushing them away, and they're holding on to me. And there is absolutely nothing there, but it's somebody that's it was a guy jumping on the whole PC bandwagon for women. And it was the most ridiculous thing. So it's gotten to this point. But I'll be on stage, and I used to do a thing where I pretend like when I'm blindfolded, the lady standing behind me, that she pinches my buttocks, which allowed me to do something secret in my performance. It wasn't even for that. But now I've got to think about that. I've got to think, am I making the lady look bad? And, is it humorous now? And it's gotten so silly that I've gotten to the point where I almost just don't care anymore. Like, I just don't care. But I have to care, because one little thing can ruin a person's entire career now.
That's scary.
Unfairly.
That's very, very scary.
Unfairly. Yep. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
And
people have power that shouldn't have power. They've got all this power. They've got all this power with words, or just suggesting that you meant something when you didn't.
Right. That's just...
it's no longer innocent until proven guilty. It's guilty until you can prove yourself innocent of something.
Yeah, and that's the way it's not supposed to be either,
Definitely not.
Yeah, just makes me sad to even think about that. I was raised, you treat others the way you want to be treated, and now it just feels like everyone goes around and points fingers. It's almost kind of like like the old witch trials back in the day. Oh, he did this, so he's a witch. He's a bad person, or whatever. And
it's if you died, you were innocent, right? That's the way it was. You get dunked, because witches didn't need to breathe. But real people did. So you get dunked and you drowned. Well, they weren't a witch. So it was like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And it's kind of where a lot of this PC stuff is now. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah. Is that why Tyus is so PC on your show?
Oh, Tyus is far from PC. Trust me. He's he's PC, but Tyus is a liberal, and he used to run the Libertarian Party's podcast at one point too. So he's very strong in his opinions, and he has his opinions about things. So yep.
Yeah. And the only reason I'm bringing Tyus up, you guys got to check out Banachek's podcast. It's why don't you tell them about your podcast?
So the podcast is a little bit about everything. It's really about my philosophies, my thinking. We have a lot of entertainers from Las Vegas, where I live in Las Vegas. Those entertainers come on. But we also have scientists like Bill Nye and people like that on as well. We also have sex experts on. Everything is from a psychological standpoint. So if I have an entertainer on, he may be a regular entertainer or a magician, but he might also be an expert on escape rooms. So we'll talk about the psychology of what goes into creating a fantastic escape room. We had a gentleman here that runs a Las Vegas gun range. And so we talked about that, but we also talked about the psychology of him getting into that and the psychology of carnival games and stuff like that. So we're a little bit all over the place, but it really is things that I like and what I enjoy and the science behind them. And I'll cover, like I just had one that was all about hoaxes, but every couple of shows I'll talk about a hoax, and I'll talk about my life, my experiences, and the things that I've investigated through the years in the parapsychology realm. Tyus is always on there with me, bouncing things back and forth. And I even had one that was all about toilets, which Tyus hated that episode and probably hates the fact that I'm even mentioning it. But we could do an entire hour on toilets, which I thought was absolutely fascinating.
Well, anyway. I loved it.
I'm only saying that right now because Tyus is in the room with me, and so I know it's going to irritate him. So yes, but it's called Banachek's Brain, and you can find it on iTunes. You can find it on Stitcher. It's you can actually just go to Banachek.com as well and find it there. Just type in Banachek's Brain and or Banachek.com.
Yeah, the toilet episode is one of my favorite episodes. I want to hear the episode that's hidden on his hard drive that he will never release.
Of course you do, and so do many people, but that will never make it out there. Titus is also my man. Titus, what you missed was he said the toilet episode was one of his favorite episodes. Yeah, yeah. But go judge for yourself. You may want to start there, or maybe not. That episode will never make it out. I tend to say what I think and what's on my mind, but we're talking about the whole PC thing, right? And I'm not going to go into great detail. But sometimes if you talk about something, people might think that you're endorsing that when you're not. In fact, you may think something's completely wrong, but you want to discuss it, you want to debate it to try to understand it or why it is what it is. And sometimes with this PC movement that's going right now, you have to be real careful with that because they could think that you're empathizing with something when that may not be what you're doing at all. So yeah, it does. It affects our work in many, many different ways.
Yeah. Especially, it's just like I started my podcast to help promote my business and stuff like that. And, there's certain topics I want to cover, but it's like I'm trying to pump the brakes just to make sure I don't say something I shouldn't say because I feel like I don't want to offend someone. It's...
Yep.
I never used to think that way. Ever.
No, you used to be able to say what you want, and sometimes you could say ahead of time, I don't mean to offend anybody, but let's discuss this.
Right.
But just by saying I don't want to offend anybody offends people now.
Right.
Yep.
Oh goodness. Yeah, we totally took a hard right turn on that.
We did take a hard right turn, but if we want to get back to mentalism, we can. We can talk about my early beginnings as well, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would definitely love to hear that. I mean, I've read about you, and I've listened to different stories about you. I think the first time I came across you, it was even before you were on the Joe Rogan's podcast. The first time I saw you, you're on a TV show he was doing, and he was getting giddy like a little kid.
What was that?
What
Say
was
that
it?
again.
Joe
Sorry,
Rogan. Was I cutting out?
Yeah, you cut out just a little bit. But before Joe Rogan,
Okay.
Who was it?
Well, before the Joe Rogan podcast, you're on his TV show on Sci-Fi, and he was getting giddy like a little kid.
Joe Rogan's an interesting character. He's a friend. I ran into him shortly after that show by accident. I was at the Mandalay Bay, and I was sitting at the bar, and I hear I feel a tap on my shoulder. It's like, Banachek. And he said, Banachek, you changed mine and Duncan's entire philosophy about psychic phenomena. Up until that point, I was believing in that stuff, but you completely rocked my world and changed the way I think about it because you were more psychic than any of the psychics that we had investigated. So I just want to thank you for that, which was a really nice thing for him to say. But I go way, way back. I mean, like the Penn and Teller bullet catch. I don't know if you ever saw that when you were in Las Vegas, but they closed their show with that for many, many years until we had the shooting in Vegas. I created that bullet catch. Chris Angel, I worked on over 100 episodes of television for Chris, and my job was to create the magic for that show. So I'm not just a mentalist, I'm also a creator of magic as well, and that's primarily where most of my work lies. I do work as the James Randi Educational Foundation's president right now, and we still have the $1 Million Challenge. However, it's not open to anybody and everybody that wants to come in. We sort of pinpoint it with a laser beam now at high-profile psychics or anybody that's been tested by an accredited testing facility that has a prize money as well. So if anybody asks that, and it has to be ones that we've approved, then we would go ahead and test them for the $1 Million Challenge. So I've got both of those things going on right now. But right now I travel around the country, around the world. I was just in Taiwan. I was in Shanghai. I live in Las Vegas, so I've worked every casino almost in Las Vegas at some point performing my mentalism show. And I also have another show called Telepathy, which is all about my life of investigating psychics and psychic phenomena and my own personal life itself, growing up as a kid in South Africa, and from there.
You grew up in South Africa?
I was born in England, left when I was 9, went to South Africa when I was 9 years old, and I was abandoned in South Africa with 2 brothers, a year and 3 years old. Pretty much raised them by myself until I was 15. It was while I was in South Africa that I heard Uri Geller, who we talked about earlier, saying that he could bend objects with his mind, and he told people if they got a piece of metal and brought it to the radio themselves, that they could get it to bend. So I went around the house looking for a piece of metal. I found a little needle in a sewing kit my mom had left behind. I thought that would be perfect. It's not too big. It's nice and small and tiny. This should be easy to do. And I held it up to the radio, concentrated on it. And in my mind, I believed that I had bent it on such a micro level. It hadn't bent at all. It was just my imagination, but I believed it had bent. And it wasn't until many years later when I was I went to Australia after that, but then I moved to Colorado, that I picked up a book by James the Amazing Randi, and it said that the truth about Uri Geller is that Uri Geller was a fake, was a fraud. Nobody had told me that before. Every adult I knew had actually believed in Uri Geller. So I had believed as well. I learned a valuable lesson that just because people in authoritative positions believe in something doesn't make it genuine. So I started creating my own methods for bending metal objects, and it was there that I started doing it at school, and it was there that the kids started stealing the cafeteria silverware, and it was from that point, and that's why I wrote the Amazing Randy a letter telling him that, hey, if you want somebody to fool scientists, I'd be happy to do so, and that's what led us into Project Alpha, when in 1969 McDonnell Aircraft gave $500,000 to Washington University to study psychic phenomena, that I wrote them a letter and said, hey, look, I can bend metal with my mind. And it was then that I was studied by the physicists that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I was. Oh, that Project Alpha thing, I could probably talk to you for like a week about, because I just read about it and listen to different stories about it, and it just blows my mind. I mean, oh my goodness. But so that all started at a young age, and
well, Project Alpha started when I was 16 years old. Everything else happened, but I wasn't into magic until I got after I had fooled the scientists. I started getting more into magic because I didn't know any magicians at the time. But really, my forte has been able to, or fort, depending how you pronounce it yourself, was to create things. I'm a troubleshooter. Basically, I would sit in a room with Chris Angel, would come up with 300 to 350 different ideas we wanted to do in a season, have 2 weeks to come up with those ideas, 2 weeks off, and then we'd start shooting the TV series. To put it in perspective, David Blaine usually had about a year or so, 6 months to a year to tape an entire episode. We would have 1.5 weeks to tape a television episode, and then we had to deliver because we had to do the next one, because we were doing a series. We were not doing one-offs. So I'm able to come up with methods for things. When I work with the scientist would just present something to me and say, can you move this rotor under a bell jar? Can you shorten the life of this fuse? Can you link these 2 rings together made of different materials? And I would just on the spot figure ways to do it.
That's crazy. I mean, I've just on the spot like that, and it's just like I try to do. I don't want to give too much away, because I go out on the street and promote the podcast by doing a little bit of street magic myself. So I don't want to give it away, but
sure,
I screw up simple palming techniques and stuff like that, and you did all this stuff on the spot.
It's natural for me. I'm lucky that way. You know, some people sit down, play the piano. Other people, they're really good with numbers and math. Other people can just do computer code by looking at it. You know, you see these incredible autistic people that are doing incredible things, and they each have their own talent. Some people can recite, every comic book character and every storyline for every comic book character in Marvel Comics, and they retain all that information. I'm just really good at, under pressure, coming up with ways of doing things. That's my talent.
So how'd you end up meeting Chris Angel and end up having to, well, not end up having to, but end up working with him?
So I had seen Chris Angel's TV show Supernatural. Didn't know anything about him. It's kind of when he was in his goth mode. And that was on Fox. And then I got an email from Chris saying that he had a TV series and he wanted to bring me to Las Vegas. Up until that point, he had brought a lot of people in, and he was doing it, he was trying to impress people. He was picking them up in a limousine at the airport, really putting them up in a hotel, talking and trying to find consultants. His consultants at the time consisted of Yeah. And his consultants at the time consisted of Johnny Thompson, who's an absolutely brilliant magician, just recently passed away, had forgotten more magic than God. And Dexter, who worked behind a magic counter and so knew a lot of tricks, and another young kid, Jacob Spinney, only knew a couple of tricks, a very young, upcoming guy back then. And he brought me in, and so a lot of money had already been spent on the magic out of the production costs. But he brought me in because he wanted to do a buried alive. I am the first person to be buried alive, 6 feet under the ground, chained, handcuffed in a glass coffin, and have to dig my way to the surface with a one camera shot on top, so you can see that I'm not doing, there's no cutaways or anything. I was the first person to do that. I also did the bullet catch that Penn and Teller closed every show in Las Vegas with for many, many, many years. And I used to perform that as well. So I created a lot of magic. If you see any mentalists working today, more than likely they're using 1, 2, or 3 of my effects in their shows, or at least a lot of my techniques in their performances. So he brought me in, started talking to me because he wanted to do a buried alive, and he wanted to do a bullet catch. So we got to talking. And then he said, I don't have anybody like you. I'd love to have you on my production. He says, but we really don't have much money left. And he was absolutely right. There wasn't much money left because he had spent a lot of money. It was his very first season and put a lot of money in doing research. And so there wasn't much money left for the magic. I said, I'll be happy to come in. And I have a ton of shows because I was doing college shows at the time. I said, but I'll make sure that I can have people in place that can do what I need to do if that's the case. And I brought a gentleman in by the name of Luke Jemay at the time as well to work with Chris when I was gone. And that whole first season, really pretty much we were fixing things that wouldn't work and creating new effects. And that's where it really started with me working with Chris at the time. And it worked so well that season that I ended up working the next season, the third season, the fourth season. And then we had a little difference of opinion in the fourth season. But at that part, I was also like brain dead. I was so worn out at that point that I needed a break. And it wasn't until he went on a brand new network, Spike TV, that I came back and started working with Chris. And then we had a one-off on A&E as well that I worked with him on there. Chris is an absolutely brilliant thinker himself. And, it was really, truly a pleasure to work with him during those years. And we learned so much about television. I couldn't have paid to have got the knowledge, the hands-on knowledge that I did while we were working on those shows. Because when we started out, we had absolutely no clue what we were doing. And we put a format together that worked very well that are used by many other magicians that now get television shows.
Right. Yeah, because to be honest, it's going to sound a little silly. I mean, up until like my mid-20s, probably my late 20s, I used to think him and like David Blaine were like warlocks or something. And, I didn't become a skeptic until I got older. I'm just like, oh, holy crap, how do they do this? And
yeah, a lot of people thought we were using stooges in the early days, and we weren't. They just couldn't understand how the magic was done. And I can't go into those details right now. I do have to say that I do have to go very shortly because I've got another appointment. Do you have any final questions that you have for me, though? Because I want to make sure we get those in.
Oh, goodness. Do you believe in ghosts?
Do I believe in ghosts? No, I don't believe in ghosts. There is that old joke, right, of, the classroom teacher's right there, and he says to the students, is there anybody here that, how many people believe in ghosts? And a whole bunch of hands go up. And he says, all right, how many people have seen a ghost? And a bunch of hands go up. Less hands. And he says, how many people have actually had a ghost touch them? And very few hands go up. And finally, the last one is, has anybody here had sex with a ghost? And one hand goes up, and the teacher says, what, you've had sex with a ghost? He says, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said goats.
Oh, you need to tell that on your podcast, because I'd love to hear Tyus get embarrassed.
Tyus would be okay with that one. Some of the other things I say that bother him.
Yeah. Let's see, what about aliens?
Don't believe in aliens. And here's the thing with aliens. Even if somehow they were able to reach the Earth, I would tend to think that it wouldn't actually be the aliens themselves. I mean, why would they not send robots? Kind of like what we do when we go to other planets and everything. They can last a lot longer through interstellar travel. You don't have to actually risk a real human being. You still get the same amount of data. And you can find out if there's life there before you send anything out there. So I think that would be more plausible, if anything. But I don't believe in aliens per se, that they come as little green men and visit the Earth. No, I don't believe in that.
Okay. And my last final question, which is going to be my new signature thing. What's the most sinful thing you've ever done? If you're willing to share it.
That I would not be willing to share. And when we take a look at sins, right? Well, here's the thing about sin, right? It's subjective. It's really coming from the culture that you come from. Because think about, if you're raised by cannibals, you'll eat a human being and you don't see that as sinful. You see that as part of your religion. You see that as part of what your environment. So really, what is sin? Certainly we shouldn't murder people, and I've never murdered anybody. I try to treat everybody the way that I'd like to be treated. So if I do have any sins, it's never about hurting anybody else. My sins would be more things that I probably regret that I hadn't done, but more things that I've probably done to myself as opposed to done to somebody else. Because I can't think of a single instance in my life where I've gone out of my way to hurt people. I have hurt people because of circumstances that couldn't be avoided. And it's kind of like if you get a divorce with somebody, you aren't necessarily going out of your way to hurt that person, but it certainly could hurt that person. So, I'm certainly not free of sin, but sin is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it?
I agree 100%.
Yeah, it's why I try not to be judgmental.
I agree 100% with you.
I have friends from all walks of life that do all kinds of different things, and I don't judge them for what they do. I don't live their life, and if it makes them happy and it's not hurting anybody else, good for them.
Man, I agree 100% with you, Banachek. That is, that's basically my philosophy. I don't practice any traditional religion or anything like that. It's nothing traditional, but that's completely how I feel.
It's a good way to think. If I could one more time mention my own podcast, if that's okay.
You can plug anything you want. Like I said, you're the man of the hour here.
Well, I appreciate that. So Banachek's Brain, that's Banacheks, that's 1C. That's my podcast. You can find that on iTunes. You can find it on Stitcher. You can just put it into Google and it will come up at some point. And then the other thing is take a look at the jref.org. That's JREF. And take a look at the James Randi Educational Foundation. And that'll give you a lot of good tools to critically take a look at some types of psychic claims and other types of phenomena and find out what the good work that we're doing there.
All right. Thank you, Banachek, for coming on to the Sinful Show.
Thank you, my friend. Really appreciate it. You take care of yourself now.
Yeah, you too. That was an awesome interview. Sorry if there's a little bit of humming and buzzing. I'm not perfect. I had equipment technical issues, and sometimes things just get out of your hands. But that was awesome. The stories he shared with me, it was amazing. But with that, do you know what else is amazing? There's an actual app out there that will pay you to listen to podcasts. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And that app is called Podcoin. And I love it so much, I've already transferred all my podcasts that I listen to over to this application. And for every podcast I listen to, I earn Podcoin. And with that Podcoin, I can get gift cards if I wanted to, like to Amazon and Starbucks. But what I do with the Podcoin I earn from listening to podcasts, I donate it to charity. They have several different charities you can donate it to. Yeah, that's right. You can donate what you earn. One I donate to is the childhood cancer research. There's so many others out there you can donate to as well. But yeah, Just go on to, if you're on iPhone, hit the iPhone store, download Podcoin. If you're on Android, head over to your Google store, download Podcoin. And after you sign up, use the code SINFUL and you'll get 300 Podcoin on me. That's awesome, ain't it? Now, thank you all for who have left me some iTunes reviews. Helps me out tremendously. Super tremendously. Get a chance, I know it's a pain in the ass, but take 30 seconds and hop over to the podcast, the little purple icon that you listen to this on iTunes, and drop me a 5-star review. You can say whatever you want to say, just it helps me out tremendously. Helps get this show noticed. Also, you make sure you check us out on all your little social media groups there. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you call it. It's all under The Sinful Show. You want to drop us a line? Drop us a line at thesinfulshow@gmail.com. Again, that's thesinfulshow@gmail.com. Sinful with a Y. Love to hear from you guys. Till next time, this is Father Sin. Stay sinful, my friends.
I don't think anyone has a right to take the life. When